One of the other key characteristics of the program was that the COTS office that was responsible for the Space Act Agreement was very small. We basically had 2 or 3 people that spent a lot of time with us, and occasionally we had others come in to participate in reviews or look at what we're doing, but we didn't have to play the massive man-on-man that you have to play with a big government cost-plus contract, where every government employee or engineer that comes in has to have a customer employee following them and answering their questions and then incorporating suggestions, rightly or wrongly, into the system. We kept that responsibility on ourselves. In terms of the COTS office and how they related to our own program office here at Orbital ATK, as I said, they were small, but they were very much involved in what we were doing and paid a lot of attention to it. But they had good questions, but they were open to our answers. They were all highly skilled, very knowledgeable people. They didn't require much hand-holding or supervision on the part of either their manager or our management. So they were able to come in and have intelligent conversations with us about where we were going and what was going on. They asked good questions. Some of them were hard, and some of them required a lot of thought on our part, and sometimes some extra work to say, we need to answer that question better. Let's go work on this. But the fact that there were just a few of them allowed us to get our work done without a lot of management of the customer, if you will. The key thing was they let us do our job. They stayed involved and didn't require a lot of extra education because they were involved, and we were very comfortable with the relationship we had with each other. In terms of oversight versus insight, that was one of the things we talked about quite a bit, both amongst ourselves and with our NASA partners. And it was a good topic of conversation and sometimes required some redefinition and maybe re-engagement in various areas, but I think we arrived at a good balance in that. In terms of oversight, they did have oversight of whatever we did whenever we were close to the station, and safety was first there, and obviously the safety of the crew and the spacecraft. In terms of the rest of the program, they had as much insight as they wanted. We were as transparent as we possibly could be in terms of how we were doing things, and they were able to sit in on meetings almost at will, as long as they weren't financially sensitive or dealing with proprietary things that weren't just appropriate. But when we needed help, the assistance office, CATS team, was available. We didn't call on them a whole lot compared to, I think, other vendors, but they were there if we needed them and we had particular problems. I think one of the best examples of the kind of relationship we established was during the demo mission itself, when we encountered a problem with our computer system. It wasn't a showstopper necessarily, but it wasn't exactly the way we expected it to perform, so we ended up delaying for a few days before we actually made the final rendezvous. Our team was including the NASA team in all the discussions of what we were going to do, but NASA was letting us call the shots on when we were ready to actually restart the whole approach and how we were going to handle the technical issues in the mass memory Unix, for example, and deal with the unusual software characteristics that we had encountered. It was partly due to the fact that actual flight operations, no matter how hard you test, are sometimes different than the actual ground operations. And so we learned something, but we learned it together. And then by the time we were ready to make the final approach, we had their trust, and they had our back when it came to briefing the program and briefing the station safety people that we really were ready to approach. And I think that reflected the continuous communication we had leading up to the flight and the insight that they had into how our system worked, and the fact that we did trust each other in terms of sharing the same goals, having the same level of understanding of what the risk was, and the same safety objectives of protecting the crew and the spacecraft. You need to have the right people in place that have had some experience both technically and programmatically in what you're trying to do on both sides of the table. Actually, on all sides of the table, particularly when you've got state governments involved or other organizations that aren't necessarily something like NASA or something like a company like Orbital ATK, when you're relying on other organizations. You've got to have the right people in place, and then a communication system that ensures that you're talking about things at the right level on a very frequent basis. But the personal accountability, the personal responsibility for the success of the program really needs to rest on the shoulders of a few key people, and those people need to understand that, and they need to know who they're answering to all the way up and down the line. We had great interactions with the NASA team. I never felt like I was in the dark on who was in charge. Probably the toughest part was the fact that we had the International Space Station program that was going to be the contract holder for the CRS program, and then you had the COTS office, which was a separate organization responsible for the Space Act Agreement itself. And there had to be a lot of interaction between, because the COTS activity was going to support what happened on CRS, but that was a different contract vehicle. So we had to kind of keep both sides informed, but they did a pretty good job of talking amongst themselves and sharing information. That can complicate it, but if you've got, again, the right people in place with the right goals in mind, you can actually achieve that. But to me, space is people. It's the people that make it work. The technology is fantastic, the contract vehicles, the politics are all a part of it. But if you don't have the right people in place who understand both the big picture and then have the skills and experience to manage the details of what's going on, you're not going to succeed. And finding those people is a challenge nowadays because of all the different competition for talent, the many programs we have going on, and the fact that we don't have, I think, the same way of producing these kind of people that we used to. And so identifying them early on both the government and the industry side is a key part of it, so you can grow them into the right positions.